Have you ever judged someone based solely on their appearance, only to have that judgment completely shattered by the truth? I have. And what happened on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Giovanni's Italian restaurant changed not just how I see people, but how I see myself. Let me take you back to that moment because I need to share this with you, and I hope by the end of this story, you'll understand why this experience has haunted me in the best possible way. I was working my usual shift as a server at Giovanni's, one of those upscale restaurants in the heart of downtown where the clientele wore designer clothes and the cheapest thing on the menu was a $15 appetizer. The woo-ho sun was streaming through the large windows, casting golden light across the white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. Everything was perfect, pristine, exactly as our manager, Mr. Patterson, demanded it to be. I had just finished taking an order from a couple celebrating their anniversary when I heard the bell above the entrance door chime. I glanced up out of habit, ready to greet whoever was coming in with my practiced smile. But that smile froze on my face the moment I saw him. He was a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with dirt-smudged cheeks and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His jeans were torn at the knees, not in that fashionable way that costs extra at boutique stores, but in the way that speaks of real wear, real poverty, real struggle. His t-shirt was faded and hung loosely on his thin frame, and what struck me most, what made my heart skip a beat for all the wrong reasons, was that he was barefoot. His feet were dirty, calloused, and I could see small cuts and scrapes across his toes. In that moment, I'm ashamed to admit, my first thought wasn't concern or compassion. It was judgment. It was discomfort. It was the immediate assumption that this child was going to cause some kind of problem, that he was going to disrupt the carefully maintained atmosphere of our restaurant, that he didn't belong in this space of white tablecloths and expensive wine. I watched as other diners began to notice him too. Mrs. Henderson, a regular who always ordered the lobster ravioli, actually pulled her designer purse closer to her body. A businessman in a tailored suit looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from neutral to annoyed in seconds. I could feel the temperature in the room change, could sense the collective discomfort rippling through the space like a stone thrown into still water. The hostess, Jenny, a sweet girl who had only been working with us for a few months, seemed frozen at her podium. Her hand hovered over the menus, her mouth slightly open, clearly unsure of what to do or say. The boy stood just inside the doorway, his eyes scanning the restaurant with an intensity that seemed odd for a child. He wasn't looking at the food or the fancy decorations. He was looking for something, or someone, specific. My colleague Marcus, who was wiping down a nearby table, caught my eye and raised his eyebrows in a way that clearly communicated what we were all thinking. What is this kid doing here? Should someone call security? Is he going to steal something? These thoughts raced through my mind in the span of seconds, and I hate that they did. I hate that my instinct wasn't to help, but to protect the restaurant, to preserve the comfort of our paying customers, to maintain the status quo. The boy took a few steps further into the restaurant, and I noticed he was trembling slightly. At first I thought it might be from cold, even though it was a warm day, but then I realized it was nervousness. He was terrified, absolutely terrified, but he was forcing himself to be there anyway. That observation should have softened my heart immediately, but I'm ashamed to say it didn't. Not yet. I was too caught up in my own discomfort, too worried about what this meant for my shift, too concerned with how the other customers would react. Mr. Patterson, our manager, emerged from the kitchen, his expression already shifting into that practiced mask of polite but firm authority he used when dealing with what he considered undesirable situations. I had seen that look before when he had to ask a homeless man to leave the premises last month. I had seen it when he dealt with a drunk customer who got too loud, and I was seeing it now, directed at this barefoot child who looked like he might shatter into a million pieces at any moment. The boy's eyes finally found what they were searching for. His gaze locked onto Mr. Patterson, and with a voice that was barely above a whisper, but somehow carried through the now silent restaurant, he said 5 words that would change everything. 5 simple words that contained within them a story none of us could have imagined. 5 words that would strip away every assumption, every judgment, every prejudice we had constructed in those few seconds since he walked through the door. He said, with his voice shaking but his eyes determined, "I need to see the owner. It's important. Please." The way he said please with such desperate politeness, such careful respect despite his obvious fear, should have been my first clue that there was so much more to this story. But in that moment, all I could think was that this was going to be complicated, that this was going to be a situation that would require careful handling, that this child represented some kind of problem that needed to be solved or removed. I moved closer, positioning myself where I could hear the conversation, but also be ready to assist Mr. Patterson if needed. Other servers did the same. We formed this unconscious barrier between the boy and the dining customers, as if we were protecting them from some kind of contamination. The thought makes me sick now, but that's exactly what we were doing. We were treating this child like a threat, like an intrusion, like something that needed to be managed. Mr. Patterson approached the boy, and I could see him sizing up the situation, calculating the best way to handle this without causing a scene that would upset the customers. His voice, when he spoke, had that false kindness that barely masked his desire to get the boy out as quickly as possible. "Young man, I'm the manager here. The owner isn't available right now. Perhaps there's something I can help you with, or maybe you're looking for a different establishment." The subtle suggestion that the boy had simply wandered into the wrong place, that surely he meant to go somewhere else, somewhere more appropriate for someone in his condition, hung in the air like smoke. But the boy shook his head firmly, his jaw setting in a way that showed surprising determination for someone so young and so clearly out of his element. "No, sir. I need to speak with Mr. Giovanni, the owner. It's very important. I promised I would come." There was something in the way he said that last part. "I promised I would come," that sent a strange shiver down my spine. It spoke of obligation, of commitment, of something deeper than we understood. But still I didn't put it together. Still I stood there in my judgment, in my assumption that this was probably some kind of scam, some story he had been taught to tell to get money or food. Mr. Patterson's expression tightened slightly. "Mr. Giovanni is a very busy man, and we have a full restaurant, as you can see. If you need food, there's a community center 2 blocks down that serves meals. If you need help, I can give you the number for social services. But you really can't be here without shoes. It's a health code violation." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so final, was meant to end the conversation. It was meant to give the boy an out, a way to leave with some dignity while also making it clear that he wasn't welcome to stay. And I stood there, along with Jenny and Marcus and all the other staff, nodding along internally, thinking that yes, this made sense. This was the reasonable way to handle this situation. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he blinked rapidly, trying to keep them from falling. His hands clenched into small fists at his sides, and I could see him struggling with something internal, some decision he was trying to make. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, almost defiant. "My mother told me to come, before she died. She made me promise. Please, I just need 5 minutes with Mr. Giovanni. Just 5 minutes. I walked 3 hours to get here. 3 hours. Barefoot. For 3 hours this child had walked to get to our restaurant. And we were trying to turn him away. That information penetrated my consciousness like a crack in a dam, letting just a trickle of empathy through. But even then, even with that detail, I still didn't fully grasp what was happening. I exchanged glances with Marcus, and I could see my own confusion reflected in his face. What could this possibly be about? Why would a dying mother send her child on a 3-hour barefoot journey to speak to the owner of an expensive Italian restaurant? It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. And because it didn't make sense, because it didn't fit into any narrative I could easily understand, I remained in my position of judgment, of skepticism, of self-righteous certainty that we were handling this appropriately. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted from uncomfortable to almost unbearably tense. I could feel every eye in the place watching this scene unfold, could sense the mix of curiosity, annoyance, and perhaps just a touch of guilt emanating from our well-dressed patrons. Mrs. Henderson had stopped eating entirely, her fork suspended in mid-air as she watched. The businessman had put down his phone, suddenly invested in this real-life drama playing out before him. Even the couple celebrating their anniversary had stopped their intimate conversation to observe. Mr. Patterson, for the first time since I had known him, seemed genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. The mention of the boy's mother, the detail about her death, the 3-hour walk, all of it had clearly affected him more than he wanted to show. I watched as his professional mask slipped just slightly, revealing something that might have been compassion beneath the layers of managerial authority. He cleared his throat, softening his tone just a fraction. "Son, I'm very sorry about your mother. That's a terrible thing to go through. But Mr. Giovanni sees many people every day, and unless you have an appointment or he's expecting you, I really can't just interrupt him. Perhaps you could write him a letter. I'd be happy to make sure he receives it." It was a compromise, a way to acknowledge the boy's pain while still maintaining the boundary, still protecting the sanctity of our upscale establishment from this uncomfortable intrusion of poverty and grief. But even as Mr. Patterson said it, even as I watched him offer this alternative, I could see it wasn't going to be enough. The boy's face crumpled for just a moment, and in that instant he looked even younger than his years, just a child who had lost everything and was desperately trying to fulfill a promise to his dead mother. But then, almost immediately, he straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and with a determination that was heartbreaking to witness, he reached into the pocket of his torn jeans. What he pulled out made several people in the restaurant gasp quietly. It was a photograph, old and worn, the edges frayed from being handled countless times. The boy held it up with both hands, presenting it to Mr. Patterson like it was a precious document, a key to a door we couldn't yet see. She said to show him this. She said he would understand. She said he would remember. His voice broke on that last word, but he didn't lower the photograph. He stood there, barefoot and trembling, holding up this image like it was a talisman, like it contained all the answers to questions we hadn't even thought to ask. Mr. Patterson leaned forward to look at the photograph, and I watched as his entire demeanor changed in an instant. His eyes widened, his mouth fell open slightly, and the color drained from his face. He reached out with a shaking hand to take the photograph from the boy, holding it up to the light streaming through the windows as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Dear God," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Where did you get this? Who was your mother?" The boy's voice was steady now, no longer trembling, as if speaking his mother's name gave him strength. "Maria Santos. Maria Elena Santos. She worked here 20 years ago, before I was born. She said Mr. Giovanni was kind to her when no one else was. She said he gave her a chance when everyone else saw her as just another immigrant with broken English. She said he treated her like family." The name clearly meant nothing to Mr. Patterson. He was too young to have been working here 20 years ago, but the photograph obviously did. I couldn't see what was in the image from where I stood, but whatever it showed had transformed this situation entirely. Mr. Patterson's professional composure had completely shattered, replaced by something raw and urgent. "Stay right here. Don't move. I'm getting Mr. Giovanni right now." He practically ran toward the back office, still clutching the photograph, leaving the boy standing alone in the middle of the restaurant's entrance. The silence that followed was deafening. Jenny abandoned her hostess podium and brought the boy a chair, gesturing for him to sit down. He did, perching on the edge of it like he might need to flee at any moment. I found myself moving closer without consciously deciding to, drawn by a need to understand, to piece together what was happening. Marcus brought a glass of water without being asked, setting it gently on a nearby table within the boy's reach. These small acts of kindness, so delayed, so inadequate, but finally emerging from beneath our layers of judgment and assumption. I studied the boy more carefully now, really looking at him for the first time instead of just seeing the dirt and the torn clothes and the bare feet. His face, beneath the grime, had delicate features. His eyes, now that I really looked at them, were an unusual shade of amber, intelligent and watchful despite his young age. His hands, though small and dirty, had long fingers that he kept carefully folded in his lap. There was a dignity to him, I realized, a quiet strength that I had been too blind to see before. The other customers had resumed their meals, but the energy in the restaurant had completely changed. People were whispering to each other, shooting glances at the boy, clearly speculating about what was happening. I heard fragments of conversations. "Do you think, poor child, what could it be about?" And I realized that the mood had shifted from judgment to curiosity, from discomfort to concern. It was remarkable how quickly collective opinion could change, how a single photograph could transform a threatening intruder into a sympathetic figure. Less than 2 minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, Mr. Patterson emerged from the back, and behind him came a man I had only seen in passing before, usually through the window of his office. Mr. Giovanni was in his late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered, kind face that spoke of a life fully lived. He was shorter than I expected, stocky with hands that looked like they had done real work before owning this successful restaurant, and as he walked toward the boy, I saw tears streaming down his face. He wasn't trying to hide them or wipe them away. He just let them fall as he approached this barefoot child who had walked 3 hours to find him. The boy stood up quickly, respectfully, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Mr. Giovanni reached out and cupped the boy's face with both hands, studying him intently, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion and heavily accented with his native Italian. "You have your mother's eyes, those beautiful eyes, Maria's eyes." Then he pulled the boy into a fierce embrace, and the boy, who had been so strong, so determined, finally broke down and sobbed into this stranger's shoulder. Mr. Giovanni held him, rocking slightly, murmuring things in Italian that I couldn't understand, but that sounded like comfort, like grief, like love. The entire restaurant had gone completely silent. Even Mrs. Henderson, who I had never seen show much emotion about anything, had tears running down her face. The businessman was staring at his plate, his jaw clenched, clearly affected but trying not to show it. Jenny was openly crying, not even attempting to hide it, and I stood there, frozen, watching this scene unfold, and feeling something crack open inside my chest, something that felt like shame and awe and regret all mixed together. After what felt like both seconds and hours, Mr. Giovanni pulled back, keeping his hands on the boy's shoulders, looking at him with such tenderness that it hurt to witness. "Come, child, come with me. We have much to talk about." He turned to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying to every corner of the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse this interruption. This young man, he is family. He is my family, and family is always welcome here, always." Then he looked at his staff, at all of us who had stood there in our judgment, in our carefully maintained boundaries, in our protection of propriety over compassion. His eyes met mine, held my gaze for just a moment, and I saw in them both understanding and disappointment. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. The message was clear. We should have known better. We should have done better. Have you ever experienced a moment where you felt ashamed of your immediate reaction to something? Where you realized that your first instinct revealed something about yourself that you didn't particularly like? Comment below, because I need to know. I'm not alone in this feeling. Mr. Giovanni led the boy toward his private office, but before they disappeared, he paused and spoke to Mr. Patterson. "Close the restaurant. Give everyone a paid day off. We need privacy, and this," he gestured to the boy, "this is more important than business, much more important." Mr. Patterson nodded immediately. No hesitation, no argument about the lost revenue or the disruption to service. Within minutes, the restaurant was being cleared. Customers were having their meals comped, staff were being sent home with full pay, and I found myself part of a small group that Mr. Giovanni asked to stay behind. Just me, Marcus, Jenny, and Mr. Patterson. I wasn't sure why he wanted us there, but I knew better than to question it. As the last customer left and the doors were locked, Mr. Giovanni emerged from his office with the boy, whose face had been washed and who was now wearing a pair of shoes that were clearly too big for him but were better than nothing. Mr. Giovanni gestured for all of us to sit at one of the large tables, and he kept one hand protectively on the boy's shoulder the entire time. "I want you all to hear this story, Mr. Giovanni began, his accented English slow and deliberate, "because I think maybe you need to understand what you almost turned away today, what you almost failed to see because you looked only with your eyes and not with your heart." His words landed like stones in my stomach, heavy with the weight of truth I didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't deny. The boy sat very still, very quiet, his hands folded in his lap again, his eyes downcast. "Mr. Giovanni continued, 22 years ago I was not the owner of this successful restaurant. I was just a cook, working in a kitchen, trying to make enough money to bring my family from Italy to America. The man who owned this restaurant then, he was not a good man. He treated his workers poorly, paid them little, and he had a special cruelty for those who were immigrants, who spoke English badly, who he saw as desperate and therefore exploitable." He paused, looking at each of us in turn, making sure we were really listening, really hearing what he was about to say. "Maria came to work here as a dishwasher. She was young, maybe 21 or 22, fresh from Mexico with dreams of a better life. She spoke almost no English. She worked harder than anyone I had ever seen. She would arrive before dawn and leave long after dark. She sent almost every penny she earned back to her family in Oaxaca, and she was kind, so incredibly kind. Even when she was exhausted, even when the other workers mocked her Spanish accent or her humble job, she smiled. She helped others. She never complained. I watched as Mr. Giovanni's eyes grew distant, remembering. The owner, he saw her vulnerability. He began to make advances, inappropriate touches, suggestions that if she wanted more hours, better pay, she should be friendly with him. You understand what I mean? Yes. We all nodded, sickened. I saw this. I knew it was wrong. But I said nothing, I did nothing. Because I was afraid. Afraid to lose my job, afraid to speak up, afraid of what would happen if I made trouble. And this is my great shame. His voice cracked on the last word. One day, Maria refused the owner's advances definitively. She told him no in front of witnesses, and that night he fired her. He claimed she was stealing, a complete lie, but who would believe the word of an undocumented immigrant dishwasher over the owner of a successful restaurant? Maria left that night with nothing. No final paycheck, no references, nothing. And I watched her go, and I said nothing. I did nothing. The boy's head was still down, but I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. Mr. Giovanni's hand tightened on his shoulder. But Maria's kindness, it had not gone unnoticed by everyone. There was a regular customer, an older woman named Mrs. Chen who had befriended Maria. She had been teaching Maria English during her breaks. She had seen what the owner was doing, and when Maria was fired, Mrs. Chen did something extraordinary. She was a lawyer, it turned out, quite a successful one. She filed a lawsuit against the owner. She represented Maria for free, and she exposed not just what happened to Maria, but years of similar treatment of immigrant workers. Mr. Giovanni's eyes lit up slightly, even through his tears. The case made news. The owner was forced to sell the restaurant, and Mrs. Chen, she had a proposition for me. She said she had been watching me too. She said she knew I was a good cook, a hard worker, but that I had failed when it mattered most. She said I had a choice. I could use my savings to buy this restaurant at a reduced price as part of the settlement, but only if I promised to do 3 things. First, to find Maria and make sure she was taken care of financially from the proceeds of the sale. Second, to run the restaurant with integrity, treating all workers with dignity regardless of their background. And third, to never forget what silence in the face of injustice costs. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The weight of this story, the layers of it, were crushing. Mr. Giovanni looked directly at me now. I agreed. I found Maria. I gave her enough money to start a new life. She was pregnant with this boy. He gestured to the child beside him. But the father had abandoned her when he found out. She took the money and moved to a small town 3 hours from here. She opened a small shop, a little market selling Mexican goods and groceries. She built a life for herself and her son. And every year on the anniversary of the day she was fired, she would send me a letter, not asking for anything, just updating me on her life, on her boy, telling me she had forgiven me for my silence, thanking me for what I did after. His voice broke completely now. The letters stopped coming 6 months ago. I didn't know why. I didn't consider that something might have happened. I should have checked on her, I should have visited, but I told myself she was busy, that her life had moved on, that maybe she didn't need these communications anymore. I told myself comfortable lies instead of facing uncomfortable possibilities. The boy finally spoke, his voice small but clear. She got sick. Cancer. It happened fast. By the time they found it, there was nothing they could do. She died 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Giovanni let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a moan, pain made audible. She made me promise, the boy continued, his voice growing stronger, to come here after she was gone. She said I needed to tell Mr. Giovanni what happened. She said I needed to give him the photograph, the one from her last day working here, the one Mrs. Chen took of all the kitchen workers before the case went to court. She said I needed to tell him that she never blamed him for his silence back then. She said she understood fear. She said what mattered was what he did after, how he changed his life and his business because of what happened to her. She said he gave her the chance to build a good life for me, and she wanted him to know that I existed, that his act of conscience created me, in a way. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I wasn't alone. Jenny was sobbing openly. Marcus had his head in his hands. Even Mr. Patterson, usually so composed, was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Mr. Giovanni pulled the boy close again. "Your mother, she was wrong about one thing. I should have done more. I should have visited. I should have been part of your life. I should have been uncle to you, family to you both." The boy shook his head. "She said you had your own family to take care of. She said you had already given her more than anyone else ever had. She said you taught her that one person speaking up, one person acting with courage even when it's late, can change everything. She taught me that too." Then the boy reached into his pocket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn from being carried. "She wrote this for you. She made me memorize where to find you, how to ask for you, what to say. She made me promise to walk here myself, even though it hurt my feet, even though I was scared, because she said sometimes the things that matter most require sacrifice. She said you would understand that." Mr. Giovanni took the letter with shaking hands. He unfolded it carefully, reverently, and began to read silently. We all sat in respectful silence, watching his face transform as he absorbed his final communication from Maria. When he finished, he folded it carefully and placed it over his heart, holding it there. "She asks me to take care of you," he said to the boy. "She asks me to make sure you finish school, go to college, have the opportunities she never had. She asks me to be the family you lost. And she says something else." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "She says that everyone in that restaurant, everyone who judged her, everyone who was silent, everyone who looked at her and saw only a poor immigrant dishwasher, they were wrong. She says she was so much more than what they could see. She says you are so much more than what people will see when they look at you. She says to teach you to never judge others the way she was judged, but also to never forget that sometimes the people judging you the most harshly are fighting their own battles with shame and fear." These words landed on me like a physical blow. I thought about how I had looked at this boy when he walked in. I thought about my immediate assumptions, my discomfort, my desire to remove him from this space. I thought about how close I came to being complicit in turning away a child in need because he didn't fit my image of who belonged in our restaurant. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the restaurant floor. We sat in the weight of this revelation, each of us processing what we had learned, what we had almost done, what it meant about who we were. Mr. Giovanni finally broke the silence, his voice softer now but filled with determination. "What is your name, child? Your full name?" The boy straightened up, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, he spoke with something approaching pride. "Daniel. Daniel Santiago Santos. My mother said the Santiago was for my father, even though he left, because forgiveness means not letting someone else's mistakes define my identity. The Santos was for her family, for the strength they gave her. And the Daniel was because she liked how it sounded in both English and Spanish, because she wanted me to belong in both worlds." Mr. Giovanni repeated the name slowly, savoring each syllable. "Daniel Santiago Santos. A strong name, a name that carries history and hope together. Your mother chose well." He turned to address the rest of us, his expression serious. "I want you all to understand something important. What happened today, it cannot happen again. Not in this restaurant. Not in any place where we have the power to make things different. When Daniel walked through that door barefoot and dirty, what did we see? We saw a problem, a disruption, something to be managed or removed. We did not see a child who had walked 3 hours on injured feet to fulfill a dying mother's last wish. We did not see courage or determination or love. We saw only what our prejudices allowed us to see." His words were not angry, but they were firm, uncompromising. "I built this restaurant on the promise that I would never again be silent when someone needed help, that I would never again let fear or comfort or propriety stop me from doing what was right. But a promise is meaningless if it only extends to the owner. Every single person who works here must carry this same commitment. We must train our eyes to see beyond the surface. We must train our hearts to respond with compassion first, judgment later, if at all." Mr. Patterson spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "You're absolutely right. I should have handled this differently from the moment he walked in. I should have asked why he was here before trying to remove him. I should have seen a child in need instead of a potential problem. I'm sorry, Daniel, truly sorry." Daniel looked at him with those amber eyes, so like his mother's apparently, and nodded. There was no anger in his expression, just a kind of weary understanding that seemed far too mature for his age. "My mum said people react from fear a lot. She said it's not always about being bad. Sometimes it's just about being scared of what you don't understand. But she also said that being scared is not an excuse for being unkind. She said we can choose to be brave instead. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. This child who had lost everything, who had been judged and dismissed by every adult in this room, was now teaching us about compassion and courage. The irony was not lost on any of us. Jenny, who had been quietly crying this entire time, finally spoke up. "Daniel, I'm the one who was at the front desk when you came in." I froze. I didn't know what to do. I should have welcomed you. I should have asked how I could help. Instead, I just stood there like a statue. "I'm so sorry." Daniel gave her a small smile, the first smile I had seen on his face. "It's okay, I know I didn't look like I belonged. My mom told me that would happen. She said people would judge me. She said it was going to be hard. But she also said that the hard things are the most important things to do, so I did it anyway." Marcus, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange, suddenly stood up and walked over to Daniel. He knelt down so he was at eye level with the boy. "I want you to know something. When you walked in today, I thought terrible things, I assumed terrible things, and I was completely wrong. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You're braver than me, braver than anyone in this room, and I promise you, from this day forward, I will never look at someone and assume I know their story. I will never again let someone's appearance determine whether they deserve my respect or my help." Daniel reached out and shook Marcus's hand solemnly, like they were making a pact, and in a way they were. We all were. This moment was changing something fundamental in each of us, cracking open the comfortable shells we had built around our judgments and forcing us to confront who we really were when tested. I found myself standing up, my legs shaky, my heart pounding. I walked over to where Daniel sat and knelt down beside Marcus. "Daniel, I need to tell you something too. When you walked in, I saw your bare feet, your dirty clothes, and I immediately wanted you gone. I wanted you out of this restaurant because you made me uncomfortable, because you didn't fit the image of who I thought belonged here. I didn't see you as a person with a story, with feelings, with reasons for being here. I saw you as an intrusion, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry for that. Your mother sounds like she was an incredible woman, and she clearly raised an incredible son. Thank you for being brave enough to come here today. Thank you for not giving up when we tried to turn you away. Thank you for teaching us something we desperately needed to learn." Daniel looked at me with those wise, ancient eyes trapped in a child's face. "My mum said that sometimes the best teachers are the people who get things wrong and then learn from it. She said it's not about being perfect, it's about being willing to change when you realize you need to. She said, that's what Mr. Giovanni did. He made a mistake by being silent, but then he changed his whole life because of it. That's what makes someone good. Not never making mistakes, but being willing to fix them." I nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in my throat. This child, this barefoot boy we had almost turned away, was delivering profound wisdom with the simplicity of truth. Mr. Giovanni stood up, clearing his throat to regain everyone's attention. "Daniel will be staying with me and my family starting today. We have plenty of room. My wife Rosa will love having another child to fuss over, even though our own are grown now. We will make sure Daniel has everything he needs: school, clothes, support, family. But more than that, we will honor Maria's memory by doing what she asked. We will be family to him. And this restaurant, this business that exists because of Maria's courage and suffering, will now also become Daniel's legacy. When he is old enough, if he wants it, this will be his. Because it should have always been partially Maria's, and through her it is now Daniel's." The boy's eyes widened. I mean, that's too much. I just came to deliver the message. I don't need anything. I just needed to keep my promise." Mr. Giovanni smiled, a real smile that crinkled his eyes and warmed his whole face. "That is exactly why you deserve everything. Because you do not ask. Because you came here with nothing, expecting nothing, except to honor your mother's last wish. That kind of integrity, that kind of character is rare, and it is precious. You will have the childhood your mother wanted for you. You will have opportunities. You will have love. You will have family. This is not charity. This is justice, finally, after too many years." Over the following hours, practical arrangements were made. Mr. Patterson called social services to ensure everything was legal and documented properly. Rosa, Mr. Giovanni's wife, arrived and immediately enveloped Daniel in the kind of warm maternal embrace he had been missing since his mother's death. She cried over his bare feet, over his worn clothes, over the weight he had clearly lost. She immediately made plans for shopping trips, doctor visits, enrollment in school. Jenny volunteered to help with anything Daniel needed. Marcus offered to tutor him if he needed help with homework. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had been sent home with her meal comped but had apparently stood outside the windows watching this entire scene unfold, came back and knocked on the locked door. When we let her in, she approached Daniel with tears streaming down her face and handed him an envelope. "This is for you," she said simply. "For school clothes, for books, for whatever you need. I'm sorry I pulled my purse away when you walked in. I'm ashamed of that reaction. Please accept this as my apology and my promise to do better." Inside the envelope was a check for $5,000. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. Other customers who had been in the restaurant had similar reactions. Throughout the evening, people returned with donations, offers of help, expressions of shame at their initial reactions and determination to make amends. The businessman who had looked so annoyed brought gift cards to clothing stores. The anniversary couple brought a bag of their son's outgrown shoes and clothes. A woman I had never seen before brought a brand new laptop, saying every student needed one these days. This outpouring of support, this collective recognition of our shared failure and our shared responsibility to do better, was overwhelming. But what struck me most was Daniel's reaction to all of it. He accepted each gift with quiet grace, with genuine gratitude, but without the desperate neediness you might expect from a child who had lost everything. He had a dignity that could not be stripped away by poverty or circumstance. His mother had given him something more valuable than material wealth. She had given him a sense of self-worth that was not dependent on what he had or how he looked. She had given him the understanding that his value was intrinsic, unchangeable, regardless of how others treated him. As the evening turned to night and the impromptu gathering finally began to break up, Mr. Giovanni asked me to stay for a moment. Daniel and Rosa had already left to go home and get him settled. Marcus and Jenny had gone. Mr. Patterson was in the office finishing paperwork. It was just the two of us in the empty restaurant. "I saw your face today," Mr. Giovanni said quietly, when Daniel walked in. "And I saw your face after you learned his story. The change, it was profound. This experience has affected you deeply, yes?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good," he said firmly. It should haunt you a little, that initial reaction. Not to torture yourself, but to remember. To make sure that the next time someone walks through that door who doesn't fit your expectations, you pause, you ask questions, you lead with compassion instead of judgment. This is how we change. This is how we become better than we were." He put his hand on my shoulder, much as he had done with Daniel earlier. "I am telling you this not to make you feel bad, but to make you feel responsible. Because you are. We all are. Every interaction we have is an opportunity to see people as they truly are, or to reduce them to our assumptions about them. Maria spent her whole life being reduced to assumptions. Immigrant, dishwasher, poor, illegal, disposable. None of those words captured who she really was. Brave, kind, strong, loving, remarkable. Those words were true, but most people never bothered to look deep enough to see them. I finally found my voice. "How do you live with it? The guilt of not speaking up when it mattered?" He sighed deeply. "I don't, not entirely. The guilt lives with me always, but I channel it into action. Every worker in this restaurant is treated with dignity and paid fairly. When I see injustice now, I speak. When I see someone being judged or dismissed, I intervene. I cannot change the past. I can only make sure that my future is different. That is all any of us can do. Recognize where we failed, commit to doing better, and then actually do better, again and again, even when it's uncomfortable or costly." His words settled into my bones, changing something fundamental in how I understood my own responsibility in the world. "Thank you," I said simply, "for letting us be part of this, for teaching us this lesson. I won't forget it." He smiled sadly. "Good, because Daniel won't forget it either. He will carry his mother's story, and now our stories, for the rest of his life. Let's make sure that what he carries is not just the memory of being judged, but the memory of people who were willing to recognize their mistakes and change because of them." The weeks following that transformational day were filled with changes, both visible and invisible. Daniel started school at a local private academy that Mr. Giovanni enrolled him in. and I would sometimes see him in the restaurant after school, doing his homework at a corner table, while Rosa brought him snacks and ruffled his hair. He had gained weight, his cheeks had filled out, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by something that looked like cautious hope. He was still quiet, still watchful, but occasionally I would hear him laugh at something Rosa said, and the sound was like music. The photograph that Daniel had brought, the one that had changed everything, was now framed and hanging prominently in the restaurant's entrance. It showed a group of kitchen workers from 22 years ago, Maria among them, young and smiling despite everything she was going through. Mr. Giovanni had placed a small plaque beneath it that read, Maria Elena Santos, 1982-2025. She taught us that everyone has a story worth knowing, a dignity worth honoring, and a value that transcends their circumstances. This restaurant exists because of her courage. We exist to honor her memory. Customers would often stop and read the plaque, and the staff had been trained to share Maria's story with anyone who asked. It became part of the restaurant's identity, part of our mission. We were no longer just a place that served expensive Italian food to well-dressed clientele. We were a place that stood for something, a place that had learned a hard lesson and was determined not to forget it. But the changes in me were even more profound than the changes in the restaurant. I found myself looking at people differently now, really looking at them. The homeless man who sat outside the coffee shop on my way to work, I started stopping to talk to him, to learn his name, Jackson, to hear his story. He had been a veteran who fell through the cracks of a system that was supposed to support him. He had a daughter he hadn't seen in years. He loved astronomy and could name all the constellations. None of that was visible in his dirty clothes or his cardboard sign, but it was all there, just waiting for someone to care enough to ask. The single mother who brought her kids into the restaurant on special occasions, carefully counting her money to make sure she could afford the meal, I started making sure she got accidentally upgraded to better dishes, that her kids got free desserts. I learned that she was working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, but she was determined to give her children a better life. Her resilience was heroic, but it was invisible unless you bothered to see it. The elderly man who came in alone every Tuesday and sat at the same table, I started joining him for a few minutes when I could. His name was Robert. He had been married for 50 years before his wife died 2 years ago. He came to Giovanni's every Tuesday because it had been their weekly date night spot. He ordered for 2 out of habit, then packaged up the second meal to take home, where he would eat it the next day while looking at her photograph. His grief was a physical presence, but you would never know it if you only saw him as just another customer. These stories were everywhere, I realized. Every person who walked through our doors carried entire universes of experience, pain, joy, struggle, and triumph. And most of us, most of the time, never bothered to look beyond the surface. We made our judgments in seconds based on appearance, on whether someone seemed to belong, on whether they made us comfortable or uncomfortable. We reduced infinite complexity to simple categories, acceptable or unacceptable, worthy of our attention or not. Daniel's visit had shattered that comfortable system of categorization for me. Now I couldn't unsee what I had learned. I couldn't unknow that the barefoot boy who seemed like an intrusion was actually a child of immense courage, fulfilling a sacred promise to his dying mother. I couldn't forget that my initial judgment had been so completely, utterly wrong. And if I could be that wrong about Daniel, how many others had I been wrong about over the years? How many stories had I dismissed? How many people had I reduced to caricatures because it was easier than engaging with their full humanity? One afternoon, about 2 months after Daniel's arrival, Mr. Giovanni called a staff meeting. We gathered in the restaurant after closing, and he stood before us with Daniel beside him. The boy had transformed physically. He was healthier, happier, more confident, but there was still something in his eyes that spoke of old wisdom, of experiences that had aged him beyond his years. "Daniel has something he wants to share with all of you," Mr. Giovanni said, his hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. "We have been working on this together, and we think it is time." Daniel stepped forward, holding a folder. His voice was still soft, but it carried clearly through the room. "My mom kept journals. She wrote in them almost every day. After she died, I found 37 notebooks filled with her thoughts, her memories, her experiences. With Mr. Giovanni's help, we have been reading through them, and we found the entries about her time working here." He opened the folder and pulled out several photocopied pages. I want to read you something she wrote the day she was fired. The day everything changed. He cleared his throat and began to read in his careful, deliberate way. Today I lost my job, but I found my dignity. Today I was accused of being a thief, but I discovered I am rich in courage. Today I was thrown out of a place I thought was my future, but I learned that my future is something I will build myself, not something that can be given or taken by others. The man who fired me thinks he has taken everything from me, but he is wrong. He cannot take my spirit. He cannot take my worth. He cannot take my determination to create a good life for my baby. He cannot take my faith that there are good people in the world, even if I have not met all of them yet. Daniel paused, his voice catching slightly before he continued. Today I was judged by my accent, by my position, by my vulnerability, but I judge myself by my heart, and my heart is good. I judge myself by my intentions, and my intentions are pure. I judge myself by my capacity to love, and my capacity to love is infinite. No one can make me less than I am. No one can steal my humanity. I am Maria Elena Santos, daughter of farmers, granddaughter of rebels, great-granddaughter of survivors. I carry centuries of strength in my blood. This man who fired me today, he sees only a poor immigrant, but I see a future where my child will never be treated as I was treated. I see a future where my struggle creates opportunity. I see a future where my pain becomes purpose. There was not a dry eye in the room. Daniel folded the paper carefully and looked up at all of us. My mom wrote that 22 years ago, when she was alone and scared and didn't know how she was going to survive. But she did survive. She built a life, she raised me, she taught me that how people treat you doesn't define your value, but how you treat others defines your character. She wanted me to read this to you because she wanted you to know that she understood why people judged her. She understood that fear makes people do things they're not proud of. She understood that everyone is fighting battles you can't see, but she also wanted you to know that understanding is not the same as accepting. She wanted you to know that we can all choose to be better than our fears. Mr. Giovanni spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. We have decided to create something in Maria's honor, a foundation. The Maria Elena Santos Foundation will provide scholarships for children of immigrants who want to pursue higher education. It will offer job training for people who have been dismissed or overlooked because of their backgrounds. It will fund programs that teach people to see beyond surface judgments. And every person who works at this restaurant will be required to volunteer at least 10 hours a month with the foundation to ensure that we stay connected to the very real struggles of people we might otherwise overlook. He looked around at all of us. This is not optional. This is part of working here now. We are not just a restaurant. We are a community committed to honoring Maria's legacy by making sure that no one else is treated as she was treated. That no child like Daniel has to walk 3 hours barefoot to find help because they have nowhere else to turn. That no person is judged solely by their appearance or their circumstances. The commitment was immediate and unanimous. Everyone wanted to be part of this. Everyone wanted to transform their guilt and shame into action, into change, into something meaningful. Over the following months, the foundation grew. Local businesses contributed. Customers donated. Word spread about what had happened at Giovanni's, about the barefoot boy and the dying mother's last wish, and the restaurant owner who turned his life's deepest regret into a mission of redemption. News outlets picked up the story. It went viral on social media. Suddenly, people from all over the country were reaching out, sharing their own stories of being judged, of being dismissed, of being seen as less than they were because of their circumstances. The Foundation's scholarship fund grew beyond anything we had imagined. But more importantly, the story was changing how people thought about judgment itself. I started receiving messages from complete strangers telling me that Daniel's story had made them reconsider how they looked at homeless people, at immigrants, at anyone who seemed different or out of place. Teachers were using the story in their classrooms to talk about empathy and prejudice. Churches were using it in sermons about seeing the divine in unexpected places. Social workers were using it in training programs about unconscious bias. One message in particular struck me deeply. It was from a woman who wrote, "I saw a homeless man sitting outside a grocery store last week. My first instinct was to walk past quickly, avoiding eye contact. But then I thought about the barefoot boy at Giovanni's. I thought about how close everyone came to turning him away. I thought about what they would have missed if they had. So I stopped. I asked the man his name. I asked if he was hungry. We talked for 20 minutes. His name is Thomas. He has a PhD in chemistry. He lost everything when his wife died, and he couldn't cope with the grief. He started drinking. He lost his job. He lost his home. He lost his children's respect, but he's been sober for 3 months now. He's trying to rebuild. And he said that the fact that I stopped, that I asked his name, that I treated him like a person, it gave him hope that maybe he could come back from this. Maybe he was still worth something. That's what your story taught me. That's what Daniel taught all of us, that every person we pass has a story we don't know, and that story might break our hearts if we bother to hear it. That message encapsulated everything that had happened, everything that Daniel's courage and Maria's final wish had set in motion. It was not just about one boy or one restaurant or one story. It was about a fundamental shift in how we see each other, how we treat each other, how we recognize our shared humanity even when it's packaged in ways that make us uncomfortable. Daniel himself was flourishing. He maintained good grades at school, made friends who didn't know or care about his difficult past, and slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing his mother. But he also maintained a remarkable commitment to the foundation that bore her name. He would often accompany Mr. Giovanni to speaking engagements, sharing his story, reading passages from his mother's journals, reminding audiences that judgment is easy, but understanding takes courage. I watched him give a speech at a local high school once, about 6 months after he had first walked into Giovanni's. He stood at the podium, no longer the frightened, barefoot child we had almost turned away, but confident and articulate, his voice clear and strong. My mother used to tell me that there are 2 ways to respond when someone judges you unfairly, he said to the assembled students. The first is to accept their judgment, to believe what they believe about you, to let their limited vision become your reality. The second is to prove them wrong, not by being angry or vengeful, but by simply being fully yourself, by refusing to shrink, by refusing to hide, by showing them that their judgment says more about their limitations than about your worth. He paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. When I walked into that restaurant barefoot and dirty, every adult in that room judged me. They saw a problem, a threat, something that didn't belong. And I could have accepted that judgment. I could have turned around and left. I could have believed that they were right, that I didn't belong in a place like that someone like me had no business asking for help from successful people. But my mother had taught me differently. She had taught me that my worth was not determined by other people's comfort with my presence. She had taught me that I had every right to take up space in this world, to ask for what I needed, to expect to be treated with basic human dignity. The students were silent, completely focused on his words. But here's the thing that surprised me. When those adults learned my story, when they understood why I was there, they changed. Not all people do. Some people are so committed to their judgments that no amount of evidence will shift them. But these people, they were willing to admit they were wrong. They were willing to feel ashamed of their initial reactions. They were willing to commit to doing better. And that's what gave me hope. Not that they got it right the first time, but that they were willing to learn. He looked directly at the audience now, his amber eyes intense. All of you will judge people unfairly at some point. All of you will make assumptions based on appearance or circumstances. That's human nature. The question is not whether you'll judge, but what you'll do when you realize your judgment was wrong. Will you defend it? Will you make excuses? Will you blame the other person for not fitting your expectations? Or will you do the hard thing? Will you admit you were wrong? Will you change your behavior? Will you commit to seeing more clearly next time? The applause, when he finished, was thunderous. Students surrounded him afterward, wanting to talk, to share their own experiences, to thank him for his honesty. I watched from the back of the auditorium as this child who had walked 3 hours barefoot to deliver a message became a teacher himself, spreading his mother's wisdom to a new generation. As I drove home that night, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly my life had changed since that Tuesday afternoon when a barefoot boy asked for the owner. I thought about all the times before that day when I had made quick judgments, when I had reduced people to their surfaces, when I had protected my own comfort at the expense of someone else's dignity. I couldn't undo those moments, couldn't apologize to people whose names I never learned, couldn't reclaim the opportunities I had missed to be better, kinder, more aware. But I could be different going forward, and I was. The lens through which I viewed the world had been permanently altered. I saw complexity where I used to see simplicity. I saw stories where I used to see stereotypes. I saw human beings in all their messy, complicated, beautiful totality, where I used to see categories and assumptions, and while that made the world more challenging to navigate, it also made it infinitely richer, more meaningful, more connected. 1 year after Daniel's arrival, the restaurant held a special anniversary event. We closed to regular customers and instead hosted a dinner for everyone who had been part of that transformational day, plus all the scholarship recipients and program participants from the foundation. Daniel, now noticeably taller, and with a confidence that seemed to radiate from within, stood up to speak. "A year ago today I walked into this restaurant terrified," he began, his voice steady. "I was fulfilling a promise to my mother, but I was also sure that I would fail. I was sure that no one would listen to a dirty, barefoot kid. I was sure that I would be turned away, that I would disappoint my mother's memory, that I would prove that the world was exactly as harsh and unforgiving as it sometimes seemed." He looked around the room at all the faces watching him, but something unexpected happened. Yes, people judged me at first. Yes, they wanted me gone. Yes, they made assumptions based on how I looked. But when they learned the truth, they didn't just apologize and move on, they changed. They created this foundation. They committed to being better. They turned their shame into action. And because of that, dozens of kids like me now have scholarships. Hundreds of people have received job training and support. Thousands have heard this story and reconsidered their own judgments. His voice grew thick with emotion. My mother died believing that people are capable of change. That mistakes are not endpoints but opportunities. That one person speaking up, one person being brave, one person refusing to accept injustice can create ripples that spread far beyond what they can imagine. She was right. She is still right. And every day, I try to live in a way that honors her faith in human possibility. There was not a dry eye in the room. "Mr." Giovanni stood up and embraced Daniel, and then Rosa, and then one by one everyone in the room joined in, creating a massive group hug that symbolized the community that had formed around one boy's courage and one mother's final wish. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, I found myself alone with Daniel for a moment. He looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much too young, but had somehow retained their capacity for hope. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course, anything. When I first walked in that day, what did you really think? Not what you wish you had thought, but what you actually thought in that moment." I took a deep breath, choosing honesty over comfort. "I thought you were going to steal something. I thought you were going to cause a scene. I thought you were going to make my shift more difficult. I thought you didn't belong in a place like this. I thought you were a problem that needed to be solved or removed. And I am deeply ashamed of those thoughts." He nodded slowly, not seeming surprised or hurt, just thoughtful. "Thank you for being honest. That's important. Because if everyone pretends they never had those thoughts, then we can't really talk about how to change them. We have to start with the truth, even when it's ugly." The wisdom in those words, coming from a 12-year-old child, was staggering. "What made you keep going?" I asked. "When you saw how we were reacting, what made you not just turn around and leave?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "My mother's last words to me were about courage. She said that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision that something else is more important than fear. She said I would be afraid when I walked into that restaurant, but that keeping my promise to her was more important than being afraid. She said that sometimes people will judge me, will dismiss me, will try to make me feel small, but that I am not small. I am her son. I carry her strength, and no one can take that away unless I let them." He looked up at me with absolute clarity. So when everyone was staring at me like I was something dirty that had wandered in, I just kept thinking, I am Maria's son. I am Maria's son. I am here because she wanted me here, and that was bigger than their judgment. That was bigger than my fear. That was bigger than everything except my love for her. I knelt down so I was at eye level with him, this extraordinary child who had taught me more about humanity in one afternoon than I had learned in decades. "Your mother raised an incredible person, and she would be so proud of who you've become. I'm honored that I got to be part of your story, even if my part started with getting it wrong." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "But you didn't end by getting it wrong. That's what matters. My mom always said that the story of your life isn't written in single moments. It's written in how all the moments connect. You started by judging me, but you ended by learning from it. You started by wanting me gone, but you ended by being part of something that helps kids like me. That's a good story. That's the story that matters." As the anniversary event concluded and I prepared to leave, Mr. Giovanni pulled me aside one more time. He had done this periodically over the past year, checking in, making sure the lesson had stuck, ensuring that the transformation was real and lasting. "You have changed," he observed, his eyes crinkling with approval. "I see it in how you interact with customers, with staff, with everyone. You look deeper now. You ask more questions. You assume less. This is good." I nodded. Daniel changed me. That day changed me. I can't unsee what I learned. "Good," he said firmly. "Because the world needs people who can't unsee. The world needs people who are uncomfortable with easy judgments. The world needs people who remember that they got it wrong once and are determined not to get it wrong again." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "But I want to warn you about something. It is easy to maintain this awareness now, when the experience is still fresh, when Daniel is still here reminding you. The real test will come in 5 years, in 10 years, when this story has faded from the forefront of your mind. Will you still look beyond surfaces then? Will you still question your assumptions? Will you still remember the barefoot boy you almost turned away?" His words struck me deeply because I knew he was right. The intensity of this experience would fade. The emotional impact would dull. The daily challenges of life would reassert themselves, and with them, the temptation to fall back into old patterns, old shortcuts, old judgments. "How do you keep it alive?" I asked. "How do you make sure you don't forget?" He smiled sadly. "I look at that photograph every single day, the one Daniel brought with Maria's face smiling out at me. I read her letter that Daniel delivered, the one where she forgave me, but also challenged me to be better. I volunteer at the foundation, not just because it's required, but because it keeps me connected to why it matters. I tell Maria's story and Daniel's story over and over, to staff, to customers, to anyone who will listen. Not to make myself look good, but to make sure I never forget what silence costs, what judgment destroys, what courage creates." He put his hand on my shoulder, as he had done many times over the past year. "The story of the barefoot boy must become part of your story. Not something that happened to you once, but something that defines how you move through the world. Every time you are tempted to judge, you must remember Daniel's face when he first walked in. Every time you want to dismiss someone, you must remember Maria's words about being more than what people can see. Every time you are comfortable, you must remember that comfort is often the enemy of justice." These words became my touchstone. I did exactly as he suggested. I kept a copy of the photograph on my phone. I reread Daniel's speech periodically. I volunteered at the foundation every week, not just the required hours, but more, because staying connected to the stories of struggle and resilience kept my awareness sharp, kept my empathy activated, kept my judgment in check. And as the months turned into years, I watched Daniel continue to grow, continue to heal, continue to become the person his mother had hoped he would be. He excelled in school, won academic awards, made friends who knew him as Danny Giovanni, the adopted son of the restaurant owner, not as Daniel Santos, the barefoot boy who had walked 3 hours to deliver a dying mother's message. But he never hid his past. He wore it proudly, spoke about it openly, used it as a platform to advocate for others who were being judged or dismissed or overlooked. He became, in many ways, the living embodiment of his mother's belief that our struggles can become our purpose, that our pain can be transformed into power, that how we are treated doesn't have to determine how we treat others. I remember one particularly powerful moment, about 3 years after that initial encounter. Daniel was now 15, tall and confident, articulate and passionate. He had been asked to speak at a national conference on poverty and education, and the entire Giovanni's family, including the restaurant staff, traveled to support him. He stood on that stage in front of hundreds of people, educators and policymakers and activists, and he told his story with a rawness and honesty that left the audience breathless. But what struck me most was not his recounting of what happened, but his analysis of why it mattered. "When people tell the story of what happened at Giovanni's," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "they often focus on the happy ending. They talk about how I was taken in, how the foundation was created, how everything turned out okay. And those things are wonderful, and I'm grateful for them every single day. But that's not actually the most important part of the story." He paused, letting the silence build. "The most important part of the story is the 15 minutes before anyone knew who I was or why I was there. The most important part is when I was just a dirty, barefoot kid who didn't belong. The most important part is the judgment, the discomfort, the desire to remove me from that space. Because that is what happens to millions of people every single day. People who are judged by their appearance, by their circumstances, by their inability to meet someone else's standard of acceptable. People who are made to feel like they don't belong, like they are problems to be solved rather than human beings to be honored. His voice grew stronger, more insistent, and most of those people don't have a dying mother's letter that will change the narrative. Most of those people don't have a photograph that will make the powerful feel guilty enough to help. Most of those people don't get the happy ending. They just get the judgment. They just get the dismissal. They just get the door closed in their face. They just get told, implicitly or explicitly, that they don't matter, that they don't belong, that they are less than. And that is the real crisis. Not that some people are poor or struggling or different, but that we have created a world where being poor or struggling or different means you are less deserving of dignity, less worthy of compassion, less entitled to basic human respect. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. So when you tell this story, when you share what happened that day, don't just focus on the redemption. Focus on the judgment. Focus on the 15 minutes when I was nobody, when I didn't have a story that would save me, when I was just an uncomfortable presence that people wanted gone. Focus on that, because that is the reality for so many people. And then ask yourself, ask everyone, what would have happened if I hadn't had that photograph? What would have happened if my mother hadn't known Mr. Giovanni? What would have happened if I was just a random barefoot kid with no connection, no story, no way to make my presence acceptable? Would everyone have learned the same lesson? Would they have felt the same shame? Would they have changed? He let the question hang in the air. The real test of our compassion is not how we treat people once we know their story and feel guilty about our initial judgment. The real test is how we treat people when we don't know their story, when they have no connection to us, when there is no reason except basic human decency to treat them well. That is the standard we should be holding ourselves to. Not whether we can feel bad after we learn we were wrong, but whether we can resist judgment in the first place. The standing ovation that followed was prolonged and emotional. People were crying openly, clearly struck by the truth of his words, and I stood there, applauding until my hands hurt, filled with pride and also with renewed commitment, because he was right. The story I had been telling myself, the comfortable narrative where we all learned our lesson and everything turned out fine, was incomplete. The real story, the harder story, was about how quickly and completely we had judged a child in need, and while it was good that we had learned from that, it was better to commit to not making that judgment in the first place. After the conference, as we all gathered for dinner, Daniel sought me out. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone else?" he asked quietly. "Always," I responded, honored by his trust. That day when I walked into the restaurant and saw how everyone was looking at me, I almost left. I was so close to turning around and walking back out. I was so tired, my feet hurt so badly, and everyone's faces were telling me I didn't belong. For a few seconds I thought maybe my mom was wrong. Maybe there was no point, maybe Mr. Giovanni wouldn't remember her, wouldn't care, wouldn't help. Maybe I should just go back to the group home and forget about the whole thing. My heart ached imagining that moment, how close we had come to losing this entire story because of our judgment. "What made you stay?" I asked. I heard my mother's voice in my head, as clearly as if she was standing next to me. She said, "Mijo, courage is not feeling brave. Courage is being terrified and doing it anyway." And I realized that if I left, if I let their judgment chase me away, I would be proving them right. I would be accepting their assessment that I didn't belong, that I didn't matter, that I should disappear. And my mother had not raised me to disappear. She had raised me to take up space, to insist on my dignity, to refuse to be diminished. He looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much. So I stayed. Not because I felt brave, but because leaving would have been a betrayal of everything my mother taught me. And I'm so glad I stayed. Not just because of what happened after, but because in that moment I learned something about myself. I learned that I am stronger than people's judgment. I learned that I can stand in a room full of people who want me gone and still insist on my right to be there. I learned that my mother's strength lives in me. I hugged him then, this remarkable young man who had taught me more about courage and dignity than any book or sermon ever could. "Thank you for staying," I whispered. "Thank you for being brave enough to teach us what we desperately needed to learn." He hugged me back, And when he pulled away, he was smiling. You know what the funny thing is? That day changed my life in obvious ways. But I think maybe it changed yours more. I got a family, a home, opportunities. But you got something harder. You got the knowledge of who you were in that moment, and the responsibility to be better. You got the discomfort of self-awareness. And I think that's actually the more difficult gift. He was right, of course. The material benefits he received were life-changing, but they were also in some ways simpler than the internal transformation that had been required of me and everyone else in that restaurant. We had to confront our own prejudices, our own failures, our own complicity in a system that judges people by their surfaces. We had to carry the shame of our initial reactions, while also somehow transforming that shame into better behavior going forward. It was a delicate balance, acknowledging the wrong without being paralyzed by guilt, learning from the mistake without using our learning as an excuse, changing our behavior without expecting praise for doing what should have been done in the first place. Now, as I tell you this story, years after that Tuesday afternoon when everything changed, I want to be clear about something important. This is not a story with a simple moral. This is not a tale where the lesson is just, don't judge people by their appearance. That's true, of course, but it's also incomplete. The deeper lesson, the one that took me years to fully understand, is about the systems we create and maintain through our individual judgments. Every time I looked at a person and made assumptions about their worth, their story, their right to space and respect, I was reinforcing a system that privileges certain appearances, certain circumstances, certain presentations of self over others. I was participating in a collective decision about who matters and who doesn't, who belongs and who doesn't, who deserves compassion and who doesn't. And that system, replicated millions of times a day by millions of people making similar judgments, creates the world we live in, a world where a child can walk 3 hours barefoot to ask for help and be seen as a problem rather than a person, a world where poverty is treated as a moral failing rather than a circumstance, a world where appearance is valued over character, where comfort is prioritized over justice, where the maintenance of pleasant atmospheres matters more than the acknowledgement of human dignity. Changing that world requires more than just individual transformations. It requires a collective commitment to questioning our judgments, to challenging our assumptions, to actively resisting the comfortable narratives that allow us to dismiss people who make us uncomfortable. It requires building systems and structures that assume dignity rather than requiring people to prove they deserve it. It requires creating spaces where a barefoot child is welcomed first and questioned second, where the benefit of the doubt is extended to everyone, where compassion is the default rather than the exception. The Maria Elena Santos Foundation, which continues to grow and serve hundreds of people every year, is one attempt at building such a structure, but it's not enough. It will never be enough as long as the Daniels of the world have to walk 3 hours barefoot to find help, as long as the Mariahs of the world are judged and dismissed and violated because of their vulnerability, as long as any of us can walk past suffering and feel justified in our indifference, because the person suffering doesn't meet our standards of deserving. So what do I want you to take from this story? What is the point of me sharing this experience with you? I want you to remember that everyone you encounter, everyone you pass on the street, everyone who enters your space, is carrying a story you don't know. And that story might be one of incredible courage, of devastating loss, of quiet heroism, of profound struggle. That story might break your heart if you bothered to hear it. That story might change your life if you gave it the chance. But you will never know unless you resist that first instinct to judge, to categorize, to dismiss. You will never know unless you pause, unless you ask, unless you look beyond the surface to the human being beneath. Have you ever judged someone and later discovered you were completely wrong? Have you ever had an experience that made you question how you see people? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Because we all have these moments, these opportunities to learn, to grow, to become more than our prejudices allow. And sharing these experiences, being honest about our failures and our transformations, is how we collectively move toward a world where no child has to walk 3 hours barefoot to be seen as worthy of help. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it challenged you in any way, please leave a like. It helps others find this story, and I believe this is a story that needs to be shared widely. The more people who hear about Daniel and Maria, the more people who examine their own judgment, the more people who commit to seeing beyond surfaces, the better our world becomes. And please subscribe to Through My Eyes for more stories like this. Stories that challenge us, that make us uncomfortable, that force us to confront who we are and who we want to be. Stories that remind us that the most important truths are often hidden beneath surfaces we're too quick to judge. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change how you see the world. Because that's what we're doing here. Not just entertaining you, but inviting you into a conversation about what it means to be human, what it means to see each other clearly, what it means to build a world where everyone's dignity is honored, where everyone's story is valued, where everyone, regardless of how they look or where they come from or what their circumstances are, is treated as the infinitely complex, profoundly valuable human being they actually are. Daniel is now in college, studying social work, planning to dedicate his life to helping others who are judged and dismissed as he once was. Mr. Giovanni is in his 70s, still running the restaurant, but increasingly focused on the foundation. Rosa treats Daniel exactly as she treats her biological children, with fierce love and unwavering support. And me? I'm still at Giovanni's, still serving customers, still telling Maria and Daniel's story to anyone who will listen. But more importantly, I'm still learning, still questioning my assumptions, still working to see beyond surfaces, still trying to be worthy of the lesson that Barefoot boy taught me when he walked through our door and asked for the owner. Because that's what this story ultimately is. It's not just about a specific day or a specific boy or a specific restaurant. It's about the continuous choice we all face every single day. Will we judge or will we seek to understand? Will we dismiss or will we engage? Will we protect our comfort or will we honor others' dignity? Will we see problems or will we see people? The answer to those questions determines not just who we are as individuals, but what kind of world we create together. And I choose every day to remember the Barefoot boy and to let that memory guide me toward being better, seeing clearer, loving wider. That is my commitment. That is my promise. That is my way of honoring Maria Elena Santos, who taught her son that courage matters more than fear, that dignity cannot be stolen, that every person deserves to be seen as they truly are. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being willing to examine your own judgments and commit to doing better. Together, we can create a world where no child has to prove their worth before receiving help, where no person has to walk 3 hours barefoot to be seen as deserving of basic human dignity. And that would be the greatest tribute to Maria's memory and Daniel's courage that any of us could offer.